welcome to the DSR Daily. I'm David Rothkopf, joined by Riley Fessler. How are you doing, Riley?
Good.
And Minna Stein. How are you today, Minna?
I'm happy to be here. How are you?
Happy. I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy Riley's here. I'm happy we're all here. So let's start out with some news. Maybe we can start out with a good story for a change.
Yes, finally a good story to lead. Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani is poised to win the Democratic nomination for New York City mayor, leading the ranked choice primary with 44% of first choice votes and receiving a key boost from Brad Lander's cross endorsement. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo conceded after early results showed Mamdani's grassroots campaign, powered by 50,000 volunteers, outperformed Cuomo's well-funded effort. While full official results won't be confirmed until July, Mamdani's likely victory marks a significant shift in city politics, driven by young immigrant and working class voters.
Yeah, Cuomo conceded defeat even before the count on the ranked choice, simply because the math doesn't work. He would have to get something like 70% of the ranked choice votes ahead of Mamdani to win. He's not going to win. Mamdani's going to win. The Cuomo question right now is Cuomo going to run as an independent? That would be a huge mistake. He's already face planted on this thing. But then the next question is, how can the Democrats get behind all this? And what can they learn from it? I think they can get a lot out of it. It's interesting that, a signal moment in the week before the election was Bill Clinton endorsing Cuomo. And a lot of the focus on that was that Bill Clinton had been a sex offender and Cuomo had been accused of being a sex offender. And I think it was right to focus on that. But let me focus on something else. Mamdani is 33 years old. Bill Clinton was elected in 1992. That's the year Mamdani was born. That says something, right? What it says is there is a generational change afoot. And I think this election is largely about that kind of change, about a majority of New Yorkers saying, Democratic New Yorkers saying, no, we're not comfortable with the establishment. The establishment has gone along too far with policies that we don't like. And it's had a bad effect on New York. And I think, Mamdani's success also had to do with the fact, and Hakeem Jeffries said this in some analysis this morning, that he understood that what New Yorkers are concerned about is affordability. So when he comes up and says, I can make your apartment more affordable, or we're not going to charge for buses, or we're going to create this program or that, it really resonates. People want someone who's going to address that stuff rather than cater to the needs of big donors. Mamdani also ran a great campaign. But I think that the big issue in 2026 and the big issue in 2028 is going to be the big issue in every U.S. election, and that's change. We typically ask ourselves, do we like the track we're on or do we not? And if we don't, we change. And I think in this particular case, we have to ask ourselves how we change. And if that change is not generational, and if that change is not away from the Democratic establishment, and if that change is not in the direction of the needs and real life concerns of the voters, then we won't succeed. And so whether, you can't project a New York Democratic primary victory onto the whole of the United States with much accuracy, and you won't have much credibility if you do. But if you find a lesson here, it's voters in New York are saying, I'm ready to turn the page. And I think that's true with voters across the country. And I certainly hope to see that in more places. For example, it was a good sign that the Democrats made the ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee this week a guy who's still in his 40s, Congressman Garcia. That's just, even, there are a lot of you, like Riley and Minna, who think 40s is old. But the reality is, this is the end of a chapter and the beginning of a new chapter. And I, for one, am extremely happy that it is. I think it was a great victory. It was the right guy with the right policies. And I hope that he goes on to win in November. Minna?
A U.S. intelligence assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency contradicts President Trump's claim that recent American strikes obliterated Iran's nuclear program, finding instead that the damage set Iran back only a few months. The report suggests Iran moved enriched uranium and key equipment before the attacks, preserving much of its nuclear capabilities, including intact centrifuges. The White House dismissed the findings as inaccurate and preliminary, while Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu insisted the strikes devastated Iran's program. Experts warn that Iran still retains the capacity to resume its nuclear activities, possibly through covert means, despite the loss of some infrastructure.
Yeah, you want to know more about this? Go back and listen to the podcast we did on Sunday and the podcast we did on Monday and the podcast we're going to do later today on this with experts, because I think getting that expertise is extremely important. The experts said before the strikes took place that the best they could hope for is setting it back a few months. Now Trump and Hegseth and Rubio are freaking out that they're getting this criticism. Trump devoted most of his press conference at the NATO summit today to trying to debunk it and say, obliterate. It was obliterated. Didn't you hear it was obliterated? The Israelis said it was obliterated. Somebody else said it was obliterated. When you say it wasn't obliterated, you're offending the men and women who put their lives at risk. Hegseth did this whole kind of, I don't know. I mean, Republican rally rant about this whole kind of thing. Of course, it's too early to say after any such attack what its implications are. But it does seem likely that the Iranians moved the nuclear materials out of Fordo and elsewhere, and that it's probably safe. Trump said today that wasn't true, but I don't believe him. And it's likely that many people in the program are still alive because a lot of them were not in those sites. And it's likely they can replace some of the equipment that's been lost. The question is whether they want to. Trump asserts that the attacks were so brutal. He mentioned that we obliterated them, in case I haven't mentioned that we obliterated them. But if he thinks the attacks are so brutal that the Iranians are, put off having a nuclear program, there is, of course, another conclusion. And the other conclusion is that the Iranians think, well, gee, if we had a nuclear weapon, we wouldn't have been attacked. And they can cite the example of North Korea and so on. And so, I think this debate's going to go on for a while. It has certainly set off Trump. This is going to be his issue because, he now views this as one of his crowning achievements. And he can, probably persuade a bunch of people that he was right. What he won't be able to do is offset a report in a month or 6 months or in a year or in 2 years when the Iranians say, not only is the program back on track, but we have a weapon, or they detonate a weapon. And at that point, all his lies just go up in a cloud of smoke. And so, I encourage everybody to be cautious, read as many credible sources as he can, not the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission report that came out today that Trump used at the podium, because obviously that report was written to support the conclusions of Netanyahu and Trump. But watch what the IAEA says and watch what happens on the ground. Riley?
At a NATO summit in The Hague, leaders discussed increasing defense spending up to 5% of GDP, responding to pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, who praised the move as a great victory. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and others emphasized shared burden and continued support for Ukraine, though Spain and Slovakia voiced concerns about the ambitious targets. Despite some dissent, most member states signaled readiness to boost military investments, with Belgium calling 3.5% within 10 years realistic. Trump's comments questioning Article 5 stirred unease, but Rutte and other European leaders downplayed worries about U.S. commitment and stressed NATO's ongoing unity and relevance.
Um, look, we don't typically sort of give a lot of compliments to Trump, and I think that's because we try to report things as we see them. Uh, in the last term and in this term, I think Trump deserves some credit for putting pressure on the Europeans to increase their own defense spending. I think most of the credit he deserves is because he's been pushing this. Of course, I think he deserves some inadvertent credit for it because I think a lot of the Europeans concluded, well, gee, we can't count on the US anymore after Trump came in and seemed to switch sides on Ukraine. And so raising their defense budgets, they can make that look like, a tip of the cap to Trump. But the reality is it's also an insurance policy against Trump. Having said that, it's progress. Now, there's a question. Trump said that if they approach this goal, it could produce $1 trillion a year in additional defense spending, which, of course, he said should go to the US. I'm sure the Europeans are like, can we count on the US? But let's just assume that there is $1 trillion a year. Does this mean we can cut our defense spending? He didn't mention that. I mean, if he says we're shouldering too much of the burden, and now they're assuming the burden, presumably, since we're looking for places to cut, we could cut the spending we're doing because they're going to do it, right? That's how savings work. Isn't that what we should be expecting? He didn't address that because, of course, that's not going to happen. Because, of course, what he is on a mission to do is increase the revenue of the U.S. defense industry.
At a heated House hearing, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. defended his controversial overhaul of the CDC's vaccine advisory panel, replacing 17 experts with skeptics and questioning the safety of multiple vaccines, including COVID and the measles shots. Kennedy, who had pledged earlier not to interfere with vaccine policy, clashed with Democrats who accused him of spreading misinformation that could cost lives, while some Republicans praised his disruptive approach. Despite scientific consensus affirming vaccine safety, Kennedy maintained his stance, claiming conflicts of interest among former advisors and citing disputed studies to support his claims.
Kennedy is a menace. Kennedy may end up killing more people than any senior U.S. official in many, many years. The outbreaks of measles and tuberculosis and other diseases in this country already suggest that that's the case. The falling vaccine rates among many in this country as a result of the perception that that's the politically correct thing to do within the Republican Party is going to lead to a lot of suffering, and it's going to lead to some dying. The defunding of vaccine programs, the ending of putting certain vaccines on lists so that they end up getting insurance coverage and people can afford them, the ending of research projects, all of this is going to cause people to die. Kennedy is a menace. It gets lost in the coverage of all of these other things. But the reality is this: he is not only a liar, not only extraordinarily ill-equipped for the job he is the first actively pro-virus head of HHS, head of any government agency ever. He's not just pro-virus, though, because we know what viruses lead to. This guy's pro-death. He's part of the pro-death party. And he doesn't even know it because the reality is he's not a smart person. He's not an educated person. He's had a dissolute and chaotic life. He hasn't learned anything for all that he talks about what he knows. And we're at risk. We are at more risk from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. than we are from Russia, China, and Iran combined. Riley.
Well, to put a finer point on the RFK Jr. saga, a CDC vaccine committee presentation citing a non-existent study on the preservative thimerosal sparked controversy after the study's supposed author Professor Robert Berman said it was misrepresented and inaccurately attributed. The presentation, contributed by an anti-vaccine activist Lynn Redwood, was later edited to remove the erroneous citation following a Reuters report. Lawmakers from both parties have called for the meeting to be postponed amid concerns over scientific integrity and the promotion of misinformation about vaccine safety.
Well, there you go. But I don't know. I mean, at a certain point, don't these idiots realize they're going to be fact checked? I mean, don't these idiots realize that if you go to ChatGPT and say, give me a report, there could be errors in it? Or give me a report that reaches this conclusion. There could be errors in it. Apparently not. And that's because these are not intellectually rigorous people. How do we know? Because if they were intellectually rigorous, they would not be holding the views they hold. Because if you were intellectually rigorous, you wouldn't be challenging 300-year-old science. You just wouldn't. And it's more than 300 years old, by the way. 300 years is kind of the broader adoption of this kind of thing. But you know, these guys are challenging gravity. You know, they're challenging basic science. They're idiots. But as I said, they're not just idiots. They're dangerous, highly empowered idiots, which is the worst kind of idiot. Anyway, we started with some good news, so, you know, went downhill from there, but at least there was something positive. Overnight, we'll look for that more over the next 24 hours, the next few days, of course. We have Deep State Radio, because today is Wednesday, and we'll be recording that. We'll have some views on the NATO summit, and views on Iran, and views on what's going on in all of these places. And then, of course, we've got our daily shows. We've got Words Matter tomorrow. We've got all our other programming. And so go, take it, enjoy it. And if you're not going to YouTube and looking at our YouTube channel and looking at these, watching these shows or watching the segments of these shows, you're missing out. It's really, you know, it's the best way to get the most out of these episodes. So go check out our YouTube channel. Until the next time, I'm David Rothkopf. Thank you, Riley. Thank you, Minna. Bye-bye.